Turns out the symptoms of societal decay are universal. They're not unique to a specific society. You recognize them in any country at any time, now or 1,000 years ago. Always the same. The men become weak, the leaders get decadent, law enforcement gets politicized, the currency gets devalued, and then things begin to come apart. Pretty soon, doesn't take long, the society can no longer perform its most basic function. The reason we have societies in the first place, which is to protect the weak from the strong. That's why you have a society. Well, in places like this, it becomes, among many other things, very hard to travel anywhere. You just can't go where you want to go. With legitimate authority in retreat, roads are not controlled by the police, they're controlled by armed predators. And the armed predators take exactly what they want from travelers because they can. This is an ancient problem. It used to be called highway robbery. And for most of history, it kept people very close to home. Turns out it still exists, but now it's called carjacking. Carjacking is the clearest possible sign that your civilization is falling apart. And that's why you find it in places like Somalia and South Africa, places where force, violence, and clan loyalty have replaced law and order, places where might makes right. In the city of Johannesburg, for example, a vehicle is hijacked on average once every hour of the day. Now, once that happens, there's really no coming back from it. Nobody's going to build anything in a city with endemic carjacking. In fact, most normal people will leave as fast as they can, as they have in Johannesburg, as they are starting to do, we are sad to tell you, in the city of New Orleans, where carjacking is now a permanent feature of life. So again, society exists not to protect 17-year-olds with guns. On the most basic level, those are the strongest people in society, people willing to use force to get what they want. No, society exists to protect people who need the protection, the helpless, the weak, grandmothers who might be dragged and have their arms ripped off without police protection. And of course, in the absence of police protection and in the absence of leadership that cares about the weak, those are exactly the people who are murdered. And it's not just happening in New Orleans. What's interesting, if you pull back a little bit, and we have because we think that carjacking is a really clear indication of things unraveling, you find that cities with Soros-backed DAs and well-funded diversion programs for at-risk youth are seeing surges in carjackings. Could there be a connection? Philadelphia, for example. Consider that city. This is reporting from the local station there, Fox 29.
Carjackings in Philly, a crime that's been exploding over the last several months. And according to Philly police numbers released to Steve Keeley by a source, it's getting worse. From January 1st of this year through July 31st, a police source says there have been 757 carjackings citywide. There were roughly 850 carjackings in all of 2021. The latest sourced police statistics show that the majority of these carjackings, more than 500, happened at gunpoint and also happened while the victims were at their parked cars.
So why is this happening? Well, it's happening for very deep reasons. Any 15 or 17-year-old who sticks a gun in the face of strangers, threatens their lives, or kills them in order to steal a car is the product of something that is very hard to fix, disintegrating families. That's the real reason. But society, the authorities, still have an obligation to try and stop it for the sake of the rest of us. So what are these cities doing to stop it? Well, Philadelphia, like New Orleans, sends so-called at-risk youth to violin lessons through something called the Philadelphia Arts and Education Partnership. So the idea is, after a month of violin lessons, these young criminals, people who've been busted committing crimes, get their records expunged. That was the plan that Philadelphia's DA put into place last year. Has it worked? Well, sad to tell you that despite the violin lessons, crime has gone up among young people, carjackings in particular. As Philadelphia's police commissioner, Daniel Outlaw, put it, quote, "I don't want to say it's surprising, but it's definitely concerning." Really? Well, it's not surprising to us, but it is for sure an understatement. From 2020 to 2021, there's been a 108% increase in carjackings in Philadelphia. Chicago, too, putting up similar numbers. Chicago has had more than 1,000 carjackings this year alone. What does that do to a city? 1,000 carjackings? For every carjacking, there is a much larger group of people now afraid to drive. Now, Chicago is the place where Soros-backed DA Kim Foxx recently implemented something called the Juvenile Intervention and Support Center.
Detroit police arrested an 11, 12, and 14-year-old for stealing high-end Hellcats off the Jefferson North lots.
They think it's fun. They think it's fun, and there's no penalty to it.
Head of the Detroit Police Commercial Auto Theft Unit, Lieutenant Clive Stewart, stunned over the trio of kids arrested Monday right here on the storage lot of the Jefferson North plant. In a separate incident, this kid, just 14 years old, an alleged repeat carjacker, arrested this weekend. He was out on bond from a carjacking in May. Then last week, police say he jacked 2 cars on the city's east side the same night.
So if you look closely enough at this specific problem, carjacking, and that's one of many problems in our society that seem to be getting worse, but just look at this one, and you begin to realize, because everything is irony at this point, the youth violence prevention initiatives that are supposed to stop this actually enable it, indeed appear to be encouraging it, and yet they're still getting millions of dollars from the Biden administration. The youth diversion programs that make these kinds of crimes more common have a lot in common with the equity programs for unhoused people that seem to encourage homelessness. Those two have led to more carjackings. Here's a report from Fox 11 in LA.
Carjacking caught on camera. Witnesses keeping their distance as a homeless man punches a street vendor, then steals his van. The street vendor was carjacked by a homeless man over the weekend.
Tengo sus placas y todo.
Yo con él nunca tuve de mala cosa.
Esteban says he'd even seen his attacker before and that he had never had a problem with him, adding that he gave the man food shortly before he punched him in the face.
Yeah. So if they're happening in New Orleans and Los Angeles and Chicago, of course, this is happening in our biggest city, New York, which is also run by yet another Soros DA. But as evidence of the collapse of social order is in Philadelphia, Detroit, LA, and Las Vegas, nowhere in the country is experiencing a bigger increase in carjackings than the birthplace of our new civil rights movement, Minneapolis, where this all started. According to the National Insurance Crime Bureau, Minneapolis saw the largest percent increase in carjackings in the country from 2019 to 2021, a 339% jump.